Hello, everyone. Ian Hamilton here with Good Virtual Reality. In case you're new here, you can become a subscriber at goodvirtualreality.com. Many episodes of this podcast head out over email first to paid subscribers before publishing everywhere to your podcast platform of choice. Thank you to my founding members and paid subscribers for supporting the production of this independent journalism directly. Today, I'm joined from Australia by the voice of Vanessa Moss on the platform Riverside to record this on Friday night, my time in New York, but Saturday morning in Australia for my guest. And the two of us have just watched, parallel to one another, four astronauts splash down in the late afternoon sunlight over the Pacific Ocean after orbiting the moon and then returning safely to the Earth. Vanessa, thanks for joining me today. We actually rescheduled this talk by about an hour and a half because the time I originally picked would have made us both miss that historic moment. So I'll start this off with a thank you to you, Vanessa, for reminding me of that timing and inviting me in our email correspondence to move this conversation to a better time for both of us to see that. And I'm going to structure this conversation to start there out in outer space, and we'll work our way back to virtual reality. So let's get started here by asking you to say where in Australia you're tuning in from, and then talking about what space exploration means to you.
Thanks, Ian. It's so good to be here, and like you say, it's a really interesting day to be chatting about this because I think the having the astronauts go to the moon for the first time in so long and come back, and just really looking at how we can go to the very edges of what's possible. I think there's a lot of parallels in space exploration and in VR and the possibilities there too. So yes, I am coming to you from Sydney, Australia, from the lands of the Darug Indigenous people. So that actually, I don't know how many. There's so many different Indigenous people across Australia. The Darug people actually cover a really large area, something like I think 6,000 kilometers squared across a lot of the western parts of Sydney and the Blue Mountains. So that's where I am. It is currently 11:38 in the morning. We have really nice weather here, so that sort of like interesting time zone thing. It's really cool that technology allows us to connect like this, even from across the world.
Yeah, and then so where does the interest in space come from? I understand you work in radio astronomy, and so I wanted to understand where your interest in radio astronomy came from.
Sure. So it's an interesting one. So I think as a kid, I grew up exposed to a lot of different things. My mom especially, but also my just parents in general, like, try everything, explore, figure out what's interesting. So I liked astronomy as a kid, but actually it was more like science, and just curiosity about the world where there's interesting questions to answer. Why radio astronomy specifically, or how I ended up there? I mean, there's actually a really long history of radio astronomy in Australia. We're actually not even at 100 years of radio astronomy. So the early 2030s will be 100 years since the first extraterrestrial radio waves were discovered. So it's a pretty young field. And when it was first early developing, Australia was one of the key countries that was pioneering in in the studies and, discovering that the sun had radio waves, and so that strength kind of carried through in terms of one of the, I guess, key focus areas of astronomy today. And so when I first started university, it could have been anything, right? Like I was doing a physics degree, as well as majoring in Japanese. And so everything was on the table. But I met some really enthusiastic radio astronomers at university. They were really excited about the field. There were lots of interesting challenges to solve. And so I guess in a way I was shaped more by people and by those questions, and that's sort of how I ended up in radio astronomy. So, but yeah, I think there's so many cool things in the world to explore.
Interesting. Yeah. So I do journalism, and the reason I do journalism is it lets me peek into the brains of all these different people to kind of get as much of their knowledge as possible. And one of my pet questions that I was thinking about asking you on this was whether you've seen Contact, and if so, how many times?
That's a good question. Actually, if people say like, what's a good movie to find out more about radio astronomy? And yeah, that's definitely like top three. Yes, I've seen Contact probably a few times. There's a lot of really good science in it. A lot of it was based around the early searches for extraterrestrial signals And if something was detected, what would it look like? Obviously, as the movie progresses and the book as well, it sort of gets more into the like, okay, well, now we're speculating. But there's a lot of really good stuff. It was filmed at the Very Large Array, which is now the Karl Jansky Very Large Array in Socorro. And I know some of the radio astronomers who were around at the time, and they remember like when the film crews came and filmed it. So there's a lot of, I mean, we don't listen to radio signals on earphones. At least I don't in my area. But yeah, it's a really good movie. Other good kind of radio astronomers. I think in Australia there's one called The Dish, and that is covering. It's set around the Parkes Murraying Radio Telescope, and that's covering the Apollo signals. And so that's a really cool one to check. It's very, very Australian, so it's a unique flavor of film. But yeah, there's Contact's really cool. I like it as a film.
I appreciate you giving me the other film to check out. I will put it on my list. And the thing I remember from that movie is that when people are asking the question of are we alone in the universe, the answer being wouldn't that be an awful waste of space if we were? And I love that way of thinking about the enormity of the universe. And I'll use that as my segue to kind of bring us back to the future of meetings and this organization. Can you tell me about what the future of meetings is and what you do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the future of meetings, we often refer to it as TFOM, and it is an interesting thing. Obviously, in astronomy, we're focused on research and telescopes and all kinds of stuff like that. But I think there are also bigger picture questions to solve that for me are really exciting because they take us into that overlap space, like you say, where you can find out more about how other people are thinking or what they're doing. And so the original TFOM started as a symposium. We were putting the pitch together in kind of like late 2019, early 2020 to explore the evolution of meetings and interactions, how they could evolve to be more accessible or more sustainable using technology. So, like, we've been meeting in person for so long. How can technologies, like, how are they already changing how we meet and how can they change them for the better? And that symposium was an interesting time because we got approved for it just before the COVID pandemic. We held it about 6 months into it, which was, in retrospect, really timely because it was 6 months into everyone experimenting. And so we could learn from the best of what had already been done as well as the challenges people had faced. But it wasn't so long into the pandemic that people were like sick of online or that correlation between being online and being in lockdown was there. So it was a really nice time full of a lot of optimism and, innovation. And so that was really exciting. And after that, TFOM, there was no real plan to continue, but we had a group of both interested organizers who were part of organizing that meeting, as well as people from the community who had taken part. So we continued as an active group, like a community of practice to keep experimenting and exploring, doing things like working with different groups to provide advice or organizations, experimenting with new technologies over time. And I guess we'll get into it. We've drifted more and more towards immersive technologies, especially VR as one of the real kind of like parameter space that's still like unexplored. And we've done a lot of work trying to write up what we've done over time. So when we've worked with particular conferences or groups or done particular experiments, we try to write it up so we can share it as much as possible. So yeah, it's been a really fun adventure over the last, I guess, just over 5 years.
Wow. We actually met each other or interacted for the first time, I guess, in Walkabout Mini Golf. I attended one of these meetups. I flew in. It was on Mount Olympus in Walkabout Mini Golf, and I flew in to hear Don Carson give a little bit of a talk, and heard a bunch of other people that are part of your group give various insights into meetings and how they've evolved. There was a really interesting insight from that conversation discussing the role of campfires and fire period. But campfires, this idea that cooking our food took care of a lot of predigestion, and then what do we have to do after we've cooked the food? Well, we can converse and talk around the campfire. And I think a lot about that. That was an impactful thought to consider from that meetup inside virtual reality, where it was part of TFOM, to kind of to hear this idea. And there's so many examples over the years of really impactful VR that boils down to just a few people coming together in space. I just got a post up on my site today about co-location, and I was just talking on another podcast about the difference between augmented reality optics and virtual reality optics. And you have this strong draw in the technology industry to try to push these transparent optics. And I think probably the reason for the push is because you get for free in those types of headsets the connection to everybody else that's around you. You don't have to do anything to keep your eye on the people in the same room as you. Whereas in VR, there's only one headset right now, the Vision Pro, that has people detection to bring those people who are in the same physical space as you into your environment, your virtual environment, if you want them to. Right? You have that as a toggle where you can basically turn off or keep people who are in the same environment as you into space. And it's kind of silly looking back over 10 years, more than 10 years covering this industry, that it's taken so long for such a fundamental feature to become kind of the base layer of a whole operating system, that Apple has come out here and said, "Oh, the people that you're physically present to, the ones you talk to are actually kind of important and you don't want to be disconnected from them." So then there's these devs out there that I've covered a lot on my podcast and on my site that are trying to realize co-location, and they're trying to realize co-location both physically and remote. They're trying to kind of get the best of both worlds here. How do we get everyone seeing the same shared reality? How do we get everyone in the same room? And it's a remarkable challenge. It's why I think this technology is the technology of my lifetime. Is uh, 15 years or so into this, it's still not a solved problem to keep people connected, keep them satisfied with a meeting inside a headset. Are there any insights that TFOM has come up with that help, that guidelines that others can follow, or ideas that people should consider as they're thinking about making meetings happen inside a headset?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and there were so many interesting things in what you were reflecting on just then. I think I agree, that's one of the most exciting things for me too, that this isn't a solved problem, it's an exploratory space. One of the things I do tend to think about, like, people often say, "Online meetings, they're so awful," or, "There's no like, we're still trying to figure out what the etiquette is." Like, a lot of different companies, organizations are trying to come up with these rules of engagement. We've had, like, tens of thousands of years to figure out in person, and arguably, we're still kinda bad at it sometimes, right? So, yeah, online technologies are something that are still very exploratory, and there's still a lot of which is exciting, right? There's excitement in the unknown. In terms of some of the tips and things, so, like, I think one of the interesting key things that came up from the original TFON was a concept that we called digital first when it came to meetings. And, you see this around virtual first or online first or that sort of thing. Companies like Atlassian or Trello, possibly also Dropbox, have said things, like, if you're having a meeting, sometimes hybrid is actually worse than encouraging everyone to dial in from the same place and the same kind of experience, because hybrid, no matter how well you do it, you've gonna have that two classes of attendance, the people in whatever room it is and the people online. So I think that's one thing that we sort of have thought about, in that, you know, hybrid is by far the hardest. In person on its own is easier, online only is easier, and then hybrid is an interesting space. So we try to, I think, advise people to, consider that individual experience and try to minimize the ways in which, like, a particular format biases over the other. So yeah, so we tend to, but naturally, like, we can't get everyone into VR when we either do our meetings or when we work with organizations who do their meetings. And so having multiple modes of access is important too. But physical rooms or places where you're starting to, like, have people focus on those physical people around you, that actually creates more of a challenge for creating the connection online. So, yeah, I think that's probably one of the key things, is trying to minimize the ways in which people can be disadvantaged and make sure they're connecting as much as possible in the same ways. You were saying about the augmented reality. I agree, there's a lot of potential there. I actually rather than, like, people in the room, sure, but also cats, right? There are so many times, like, we're in a meeting, like, someone's cat is there and you're like, you can see them patting the air and you're like, I want to see the cat. I actually
Yes, Yes.
wonder if a lot
Cat
of this can be
detection. We
done
need
with
cat
software. Yeah?
detection.
Cat detection. I really wanna show my cats in VR. So, yeah, so there's a lot of cool things to explore, but depending on the purpose, I don't know, I think trying to bring people together in this from the same place and minimizing disadvantage is a key thing for us.
Uh, I have 4 cats. We have 4 cats in this household. We're a cat household. The top tier VR experience I've had as of right now, they've got this app on Apple Vision Pro called Retrocade. I've mentioned it on my podcast a bunch now, where it's sort of the ideal way of playing classic video games. They've got multiple modes of play so that you can either feel like you're standing at an old arcade cabinet, or you can bring the arcade cabinet sort of out of the arcade and into your environment. And I'm sitting there on Malthea. I don't know if I'm ever pronouncing that right, but it's one of the moons around Jupiter, little itty bitty rock. And I'm sitting there. That's my virtual environment on the Vision Pro. And I've brought Pac-Man out from the arcade onto this moon around Jupiter. And I lay back on my couch, recline on my couch, and I've got this perfect headband on, so it's really comfortable. I've reclined my head so that I'm not feeling so much darn weight on the front of my face. And then my cat chooses to crawl up on my chest and lay on my chest and start purring. And the beauty of the whole system, the way this works so magnificently, right, is yes, I would like cat detection, but I'd also like to turn cat detection off for moments like this where I don't want the cat blocking my virtual screen. And in fact, because there's no cat detection, I feel the cat haptically purring on my chest, but it's not blocking my Pac-Man. So I'm playing Pac-Man there with my controller in my hand, and I have this amazing physical experience of my cat purring on my chest, and I feel like I'm out there on Jupiter on a moon. And like I don't know that being able to have a FaceTime call and bring other people in is going to improve that particular experience. But I do wish that more people could do what I did right there. Like, I do wish that more people could see the sort of inarguable benefit of being able to immerse oneself in a calming environment like that, a focusing environment like that. To have my cat add to that, to have the video game of my, my one of my favorite video games, one of the best video games, perfectly in the right place. And like I start looking all around me at my physical screens and I'm starting to hate them just a little bit more each passing day because I know they can't do what I did in that moment. So, yes, I insist that cat detection is a much bigger thing that we need. And I needed the space to say that. Do you have any cat? How many cats do you have?
We have 2 cats, and yeah, it's interesting that you say that, so I agree, like, actually what you were reflecting on, I mean, it just sounds like such a cool visual moment, right? And I agree with you, it'd be so nice for more people to, like, experience it. It's really hard, like, when you've been in VR and you've immersed yourself, you just want everyone else to understand that cool value. But it made me think of there was a very famous paper in the early 90s called Beyond Being There. It's something that we've reflected on a lot in TFOM over the years. It's by Holland and Stornetta. It was a human computer interaction paper. And I think one of the key takeaways from it was, interestingly, a lot of the things people were rediscovering as part of the pandemic were already highlighted there, the challenges or the limitations, that just trying to reproduce in person was not the solution, and that the coolest parts of technology were always going to come from the ways in which we can do what we couldn't do in person. Like you say, right? You are on a moon of Jupiter playing a game with a cat that's there and not there at the same time. It's like a Schrodinger's cat. And, that is just something really amazing that immersive technology enables you couldn't otherwise do. So yeah, so we've tried to, I think, channel that as well as like, how can we not try to replace in person? There's been this huge quest for like photorealism and, faces that look real. And people say, oh, if you're an avatar that's not real, how can I take you seriously? But actually, our experience has been it's not about just trying to reproduce what you can do in person. It's really about going beyond that and augmenting the experience of interaction.
The quote that I heard from Don Carson, one of the art directors at Walkabout Mini Golf, that has been recurring, it's been coming up a lot. I'd like to more people to hear it, but he says that what they do at Walkabout and what they're trying to do is create the context for humans to interact with one another. And
Mm,
I love that it sounds so abstract at the same time that it's not. It's a very sound advice. And when you think of things like Walkabout Mini Golf, right, you have this leisurely activity that you can take at your own pace. It happens with with just a very simple swing of the arm, right? It's not a very complicated action you have to do to putt your ball down at the end of the mini golf course. And I find myself when I go into an experience like that, it becomes overwhelming to get like I've tried to do interviews in Walkabout Mini Golf, like this conversation, recreating it in Walkabout while also trying to putt 18 holes is actually kind of insane. Like it's too much mental load to try to be a good golfer and ask really good questions or formulate really good responses. And it's remarkable how easy like that can change, right? At the same time, I remembered after the TFOM meeting, we all tried to go into our different areas, and the this was I think on a different course. The was it the Shangri-La course
mm.
at another one of our meetings, and we all tried to go off to our different corners and get the sense of spatial audio, and, like, there's no golfing there, right? We've all abandoned the golf to try to focus on the I don't know, the sanctity or the quality of our conversations and to have them all independently in all these different directions. And I just I wish more devs would, sort of understand the complexity of trying to create what Don Carson is saying there, right? The context for humans to interact with one another. You know, it's not easy to get all of these things right so that people can switch those modes on a whim from like, okay, let me hit this putt and then I will answer your question type thing.
Yeah, I agree. And that's I think one of the really interesting and exciting things about virtual spaces and how we use them is that this is not just a challenge for say the technologist to solve or the computer scientists. It's, you need people who understand the social science of human psychology and what creates spaces. You mentioned the campfires before. Like we've noticed which worlds do you like spending time in? It's often things that have that sense of fieriness, of night, of coziness, like cozy spaces encourage people to hang out more. Like all of this is still quite early. I think there's a lot of people doing, say, like studies, masters or PhDs in that design of spaces and how you encourage those interactions. It's not a solved problem. And we have definitely found one of the key findings in recent TFOM work was that, you know, it doesn't seem to us anymore that the barriers to, online interaction being effective or widespread or immersive technology taking off, these aren't technology barriers anymore. The technology is almost good enough in many ways. The barriers now are human. They're cultural, they're attitudinal, how do you convince people to try something new? How do you convince them that this isn't about replacing in person? It's about giving you more opportunities to go beyond what you can do because in person is fundamentally limited. And so, yeah, like that really lies in the space, like you say, of understanding how spaces can offer these things to people and make them want to be there and facilitate interactions, not just the functional, but also the, you know, the the psychological side of it.
So, a couple broad questions here. I just want to go back. I'm ready to talk about cats more because I'm starting to form a thesis here that like, wouldn't it be funny if we found out that the reason VR wasn't taking off was because we had to leave our cats behind in reality, right? The moment they
Yeah,
add cat
it's
detection, do
tragic.
they find that people are spending a lot more time talking about their cats for an extra 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
All right, so back to my broad questions, right? Can you tell me about your first VR experience?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this and it's really funny because I can even tell you the date and place. And that's weird, I know, but so it was the 3rd of November. Okay, so I'm ignoring, say really early VR. I'm saying like the first kind of real genuine one that really recently. So it was 3rd of November 2018. It was in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. We were living overseas there at the time. I was working there, and it was in this little factory in the middle of nowhere. There was a moment where like, "Are we gonna get murdered?" But anyway, it was like a little factory that they'd set up, like a startup sort of thing. And we had this voucher from a grocery store that we could get discounted VR. It was, in this thing, they'd set up a bunch of little square areas. At the time, it was still the HTC Vive, so, you needed the lighthouses and wires and things. But I remember we went into this and we're like, wow, the technology has come so far. Like, I've wanted proper VR that felt like that since, I don't know, the early, like, late 90s or something. And so that was the first time where I was like, wow, this is actually the first VR experience I've had where I don't feel like it's a potential one day anymore. It's really like it's there. And then within a year, the Quest 1 was available. My partner got one, and then I got one in 2020 at the start of COVID. And it was just, yeah, like for it to go from, needing a PC and all of this to suddenly it's standalone, it's really good, the frame rate's quite good, you don't get sick in the same way, all you need is an internet connection. That was a huge step, I think, in really convincing me that VR was real. It was opening so many doors that had always just seemed in the realm of sci-fi before that.
So, another one of those broad questions here for you is, can you
Mhm.
name your favorite VR experiences?
That is so hard. There are so many. So, I mean, you mentioned Walkabout. That's actually been a highlight over many years. Like TFOM and Walkabout kind of started at the same time. So the symposium, the original symposium was September 2020, which was also the same. So we've kind of seen Walkabout grow and develop over time and the amazing app that it's become with all these beautiful worlds. So yeah, so that's been a highlight because like you say, it's quite a chill environment. You spend a lot of time talking and hanging out. You find the little things that are hidden in the world, so it's quite a social experience. That's been cool. I use VR for exercise actually. There's an app called HoloFit which allows you to, it's not just, boxing or whatever, but you can connect a device. So you can connect an exercise bike or a rowing machine or a elliptical. And so suddenly you're able to do the sort of exercise you would normally do in a gym in cool worlds, right? Where there's like missions to complete and it's different and it's moving and you're not just running around the neighborhood in bad weather. Like I really like, I mean, I love that. I used to play a lot of basketball, but I've been recovering from some bad injuries last year, and so I always augmented like the basketball with HoloFit. Now HoloFit's my main exercise, but I love that so much. I actually think it's a lot better than the physical only offering, like the in person. We went to you're probably aware, like Meta, I think is still trying to figure out like what is the value proposition. Last year or maybe still now they're doing concert experiences where I think these were free. They were partnering with, I guess, concert companies. I don't know what they're called, but concert companies that filmed in VR at real concerts, and then you had this immersive experience of 3D. That was really cool because for once I could see, I was like, okay, I see where this is going. Maybe we're not quite there yet, but the actually I've never followed K-pop, but one of the bands that was there, NCT Dream, like I was like, that was the first concert I'd seen. It was one of the first ones in the series where I was like, this is, like, so cool. I feel like I am at a front row seat at this concert, like and actually, I'd never heard of them before. I'm a fan now, like, so that actually acted as an effective bridge for me to discover a band that I didn't know and now I like. The Coldplay one was also really amazing. So I think those experiences where, it's impossible for everyone to go physically to a concert. It may be cost prohibitive, but you can still offer a different but similar experience, something like how many people can get front row at a concert and actually see the people up close, right? Very few, but VR is this amazing enabler of accessibility. And so that was really cool. We've been playing, I don't know, the fishing app in VR chat. That's been going crazy everywhere.
That's fantastic.
It's similar to Walkabout, right? It's like it's not a super physically intensive activity, so it kind of promotes that sitting around with people, chatting. We've had a lot of like functional T-foam chats in fish while we're trying to catch fish because you can. And actually, Glenn, another in T-foam, he was reflecting on how can we learn lessons from what's successful in fish to apply to networking and meetings? Because if you think about it, the islands are sort of areas that people travel to. There's like these little portals where the fish spawn, and they kind of act like hallways where you pass people. There's a lot of interesting social dynamics that you can take from how fish is working and try to apply it to, or how do we design better networking spaces for meetings and conferences. So yeah, so I don't know. And asteroid Ryugu is another cool one. Elizabeth from TFOM is connected to the Ryugu things, and there's a three. Actually, we should take you to it. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like a visualization of the surface of asteroid Ryugu, and that was the mission Hayabusa 2, which went and got a sample back from the asteroid. So you can actually, I mean, how many people ever, probably very, very few, are ever gonna stand on an asteroid, right? So to be able to
Mm.
reproduce that and give that experience is so cool. So yeah, there's
Oh,
just
I
so
love
many, it's
that.
really hard.
Oh, that's fantastic. You covered a lot of ground there. You sparked a lot of memories and a lot of things that I enjoy myself. Real VR Fishing is my go-to fishing app, but I need to check out the one in VR Chat. You reminded me of Titans of Space. That's one of my favorite
Mhm,
apps of all time, but it's not a social app, and almost everything you ran through there is social or on some level.
mhm,
But Titans of Space was one of these ones I had very early on. I think the dev released it as an early share app before sort of polishing it into a store production, but a lot of care there in trying to make sure that the all the data is sourced correctly and all of the
mhm,
proportions of everything are right. But you get into this app and you've got like a spacecraft around you to give you a little bit of grounding below you. And then you look forward and you've got the Earth floating right in front of you, kind of small. You've got the moon floating around it. And then you turn to the right and you've got the sun, and the sun is just gigantic, right? It's as far as you can, it's just stretching left and right at enormous scale.
mhm,
And this whole app is about scaling the universe and giving you a perception of the scale of the universe. So the moon, the earth, and the sun in that scenario are all to scale to proper scale with one another. And like that's it's like that demonstration you always see in books where the sun is shown off to the right side of the page and
yep,
you only see like the very cutout of the sun because it's so darn large that it can't be represented. Its size cannot be represented on the page of a book. And here's within 10 seconds or 5 seconds of putting on a VR headset, you're starting to grasp the scale of the universe. I've also mentioned this multiple times on my podcast, and I'll keep repeating it because it was so important to me. But back when I was reporting on VR around 2013 or so, I went
mm,
and talked to NASA a couple times, and I talked to this guy, Jeff Norris, who was working at NASA, and he was using it to analyze spacecraft data. They were explaining all the uses that they were considering for it at NASA. But he gave me this quote about platforms, and he talked about this idea of the television being the right medium for taking us to the moon landing. It allowed, 50 or 100 people to pack into a single room to look at one tiny little rectangle or square and to see this stream of video and audio data coming from another place in our solar system. And the takeaway was that that was the right medium at the time. It's no longer the right medium now. And when we send astronauts up to Mars, uh, there should be the ability to stand on Mars with them in a holodeck like way. And when they step down the ladder onto the Martian surface, we should be able to, use Gaussian. I mean, this is not what he said back in the time. This is now me just with 13 more years of distance between his comments and now Gaussian splat the whole surface and then add the live models of the people as they're coming out of the hatch and send that as a stream of data that is coming back to Earth in some coherent format that we all receive at the same time and we're all in headsets watching, feeling like we're standing together on Mars with these people that are coming down onto the Martian surface. Well, Jeff Norris got hired by Apple, and he's doing something there at Apple today. I don't know too much about it, but it's one of these many people that have been pulled from my source pool and put on projects that have very long delivery timetables, right? Like it's not going to be
Mhm.
tomorrow that we're going to experience it, but still today, all these years later, I feel like we're moving ever so closer to exactly that, and hopefully I'm able to hold my cat as well
Yeah.
when we are doing the future of meetings on Mars as the astronauts get there.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, and it doesn't even sound that far away, right? Like, I mean, it's maybe not that long, even like before, say, maybe Mars is further out, but stepping back on the moon and a lot of the things you described, the technology's there. Like, all we really need is, the organizations to do it, to aim for it. Like, I really hope we do see that because that just sounds so amazing, right? Like, you could imagine, and that you can still reproduce that collective awe that people had sitting in front of a TV because they can be in VR together, right? They can be in these spatial spaces, you can have instances, they can be in private or public, and then you can all be there in a way that you never could otherwise. Like that sounds really, really cool. I hope we see
Yeah,
that.
we're both on the same page here. I don't think it's too far. Is there a standout moment, like a single standout moment of presence in headset that comes to mind? Like a favorite moment that you can recall, really being somewhere?
It's a good question, and it kind of links in with, that reflection on how important is reality, how important is that feeling of presence. I mean, I think sometimes I found we tend to suspend a lot of disbelief because the benefits of just being with other people, like fish, when you go check out that fish world in VR chat, especially on the standalone quest, like, it is not realistic in any way. The benefits it offers, the socialness, the functionality kinda outweighs that. It's hard again because like, there's been so many, but I was like, I think one standout experience that I can remember, and it's kind of a standout for a couple reasons, was this would have been, I don't know, solidly during the pandemic, maybe 2021. At the time, there was an app called Glue. We try a lot of different kinds of meeting apps. And one of Glue's, I think, major benefits was they had a really nice aesthetic, right? The worlds they built, you liked being in them. You felt like they were kind of a little realistic, but not that realistic, right? They just had a good vibe, similar to how Walkabout has its aesthetic. And that's, a bit more kind of like colorful and that sort of thing. But anyway, so Glue had us, and I was meeting with a couple of colleagues. We were trying to talk about, I think it was to do with strategies about getting more online meetings, organizations, just sort of actions and things we could take. So we were brainstorming with post-its and stuff in Glue. But the reason it stands out is because we met in, it was like on this little deck. Like, they had, Glue had this space where it had that vibe of a refurbished, I don't know, harbor factory sort of vibe. As you're on this deck, we're under an umbrella with surrounded by virtual post-its, brainstorming this. One colleague was in Alaska, the other was in the Netherlands, and I was in Australia. And it was one of those rare moments where the Asia Pacific time zone didn't get screwed. So for me, it was like early afternoon or something. And yeah, the reason it stands out is because, like, it's as vivid a memory in my brain as any physical one I've had. So, that sense of spatial presence, I think sometimes gets lost, like the fact you're together with others, you have spatial audio, you have immersion, that actually solidifies into a memory in your brain. So I feel like I was there with them. It didn't matter that they didn't look perfectly like themselves or real or anything because we were together on that deck doing this thing. And so, yeah, so I think that's one of the moment, like one of the things we've seen over the last, I guess, several years is that, like many things, in person versus online can be quite polarizing. And for me, it's always felt like it's more about opportunities. It's more about, we would never, the three of us, be in the same physical room doing that, having that conversation. And so it enabled something that was just fundamentally not possible. And it enabled it in a really enjoyable way. And so that for me is the key thing. Because, the world, it is like huge. There are so many, astronauts crashed down in the ocean somewhere between us. I mean, not crashed, but landed smoothly. And the world is big, but it's really small if it's limited to just the people you can, walk down a hallway in or meet in the pub. I was at a pub last night. It was great. Like I had a lot of fun. Tonight, your tonight, my today, we can chat across continents. And I want to live in this connected world of no physical barriers, and we can just, we have a lot of really big problems to solve in the world, a lot of challenges, a lot of interesting directions to go. And VR technologies, immersive technologies, all the things that let us go online, they let us solve them together across physical boundaries. And to me, that's
Mm.
really special. So I really like it.
I love that. I love that. There's so you talk about barriers there, and I think we're nearing the end of our conversation. But one of the barriers I've discovered that I don't think a lot of people have picked up on is when I was a kid, my dad would have had a work phone number that I knew the phone number to. Then we had our house phone, and you fast forward 20 years or 15 years, and you get a mobile phone. Then you kill the home phone. Then you kill the work phone. And now all you have is your mobile phone and you put your entire life into it. So what I've ended up actually having to do over these last 2 years or so is add 2 phones, 2 mobile phones that I'm paying for myself out of pocket and maintaining separate numbers and separate accounts. It's allowed me to do things like take this meeting that you and I had in the future of meetings in Walkabout Mini Golf and extend it back out into this podcast in a really smooth way. And everything related to VR is contained within this device that when I need to, I can leave it at home and not think about it at any time. I can exit VR fully as much as my brain will allow me to and take my personal phone out and just enjoy books, games, the people that are closest to me physically, my family, friends that I've given that number to. They can reach me on that device, but none of the VR people can. None of my work life, none of my brain that I devote to VR can reach me on that other device. It's this thing that we lost and we didn't even know that we didn't even notice that we lost it. This ability to like go to work, come home, be home, and the people who are at work don't have your home number necessarily, or the one person who needs to reach you after hours has your personal number. But like you have a switch off moment, and it's almost like a superpower I have that very few other people have. And it's the only way, one of the only ways I can really manage being able to do exactly what we're doing right now, where I've made myself available very late my time. You've made yourself available very early into the weekend your time, but we're able to connect. And I don't know that I could have done it if I only had one phone and if I always had to context switch
Mm.
between different accounts. And it's like the internet has squeezed itself in between all of these different things that we want to be. And so like I have like we associate this with drug dealing, right? The ability to have two phones. But in a very real way, politicians, anyone that represents politicians, they usually have two phones for this very reason. Like personal correspondence has to happen separate from your public correspondence, the correspondence you do on behalf of the state. And like I wish more people would come to this realization of the inability to connect with certain people because we've been reduced in ways that we don't really notice. The way the internet has eaten at our ability to connect in that dream scenario you just outlined, right? There's invisible barriers around us that so many people like don't realize, and then they blame a headset for the reason they can't connect in these ways. When like I am so thankful that we're able to have this conversation, that we're able to smash the time zone barrier here and make this happen. And the reason this conversation happened is because we met in VR. And I hope to talk to you more in the future about a lot of things. I wanted to end this with just asking, is there anything else about the future of meetings or TFOM that you think readers should know about, listeners should know about, and where can they find more information?
So about TFOM, I think we're at a stage as a community of practice where, we've spent a lot of years working with particular organizations and helping them realize their visions and things like that. Where we're sort of going next is, and I think that was the Walkabout event that we met at was sort of exploring that too, is that, there are people all around the world who we know are like us who can see the potential of VR and immersive technologies, augmented reality, and really want to, I think, experiment and find connect with other communities. So that's sort of where we want to go. We really want to, I think, in the next the coming weeks and months and years, work closely with those groups worldwide who also see this vision, right? This vision where, like, the world of walls is not as important and we can really just work collaboratively, globally, and inclusively in ways that, we're sort of scratching the surface of. So yeah, so I think I'm really, really interested to hear from people who might be listening to your podcast that are thinking about that too. We definitely want to connect with more people and find out more about what's happening in this area. And in terms of finding out about future meetings, I think we're pretty good on the, like, if someone Googles like the future of meetings or TFOM, that will come up on Google. There's a lot of articles. We have a LinkedIn page. We have a website. There's tfom.org is our domain, but that's sometimes a little flaky, which is probably my bad on the tech side. I need to figure out what's going on there. But it's also just, there's a WordPress as well. And yeah, and really, really glad we met, and it was really cool to have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to crossing paths in the future as well.
I'll see you in virtual reality. Thank you so much. That's Vanessa Moss with the Future of Meetings. And thank you for the time. And thank you for moving this so that we could make it happen across our time zones and still see those astronauts return to Earth. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Ian. Talk to you soon.